Late last month, a young man was shot, killed, and had his body dumped into a pit on Mohawk territory. Police have not officially confirmed a motive, suspect, or made any arrests as of this recording, but our sources indicate it is likely a gang-related killing. The victim is 24-year-old Ronnie Gonzalez, a non-Mohawk who may have been hired to torch a dispensary in Kanesatake. That's according to reporting in Le Journal de Montréal. This is someone's child, gunned down and thrown into a hole. Making matters worse, it was a Mohawk teenager who found Gonzalez's body on the morning of May 29th. Gonzalez's murder comes just months after dispensary owner Normand Théoret was shot near his home in Kanesatake. Théoret's dispensary, the Sweetgrass Lodge, was burned to the ground last summer. There have been multiple shootings at dispensaries on the territory and some 38 arsons in less than 2 years. There are dozens of cannabis shops that line Kanesatake's main drag. Most are operated by locals who make a decent living by undercutting Quebec's government-run dispensaries. But there are also megastores that serve alcohol, operate slot machines, and bring thousands of non-locals onto the territory every year. Those megastores are putting the mom-and-pop shops out of business. They're also attracting a criminal element into Mohawk territory. One such store, the Green Room, was the site of a gangland hit during a party in the summer of 2021. That afternoon, a gunman walked up to street gang leader Arsène Malpoint and put 3 bullets in him. He then made off in a stolen Jeep that was abandoned in a nearby cornfield. This was a professional hit, pulled off in broad daylight, just a short walk from an elementary school. There are roughly 2,000 Mohawks who call Kanesatake home. They have seen what little is left of their land base expropriated, sold to developers, and systematically targeted by illegal toxic dumping. Now, we are learning that the Hells Angels are trying to buy up property on the territory. Not contested land, Mohawk land, right there on the Lake of Two Mountains. The leader of the Hells Angels in Quebec, Martin Rover, is married to a Mohawk woman, and 2 police sources say he is trying to buy indigenous land by putting it in her name. This is a crisis that threatens not only the security of Kanesatake and its people, but its land, the place they've lived for generations.
So, Chris, you've done a lot of coverage in Kanesatake. You're connected to a lot of local people there. How's the community doing after this death?
People are really upset. They're scared. They're pissed off. They don't exactly know who to turn to. There's not a lot of trust between the community and the SQ, the police body that patrols the community and basically started the Oka crisis in 1990. There's not a lot of trust in the institution of the band council. It's seen as like an extension of the federal government. So they don't exactly know where to turn because there's never really been a history of turning to some kind of outside authority and it ending well. So then they're left with like, well, how do we solve this problem? And that's where they're stuck. I've heard people wanting to blockade the road. I've heard of people wanting to take direct action against some of these dispensaries. Because at the end of the day, these are like maybe a half dozen dispensaries that are problematic. Really problematic, the ones that kind of bring in a lot of outsiders and the ones that are very clearly partnered with organized crime. A minority of locals are benefiting from this, and a vast majority of or at least everybody I've spoken to is fed up with this, and they want something to change, but it's not clear how it's going to change because the problem is so far along.
Mm-hmm. And like in terms of jurisdiction, I've covered First Nations in Quebec as well. People know that you can get cheap weed when you go on the res, and it's like cannabis because it's under reserves are under the federal law. They go with federal regulations, so they're able to they can sort of operate outside of the provincial regulations. And then there's also like the SQ, the Provincial Police Force of Quebec. They're their cops, right? They have a provincial police force, federal legislation surrounding marijuana, and then they don't really have a local police force. They
have perimeter security.
They have perimeter security. So it's like, it's kind of this jurisdictional mess. And I'd love it if you could tell me a bit about how that kind of impacts how these situations, how this kind of violence and how crime is dealt with in the community.
It's really hard because, to talk about this, we got to go way back. But like, here's the situation right now. There used to be local cops in Kanesatake. There was a huge political crisis that ended with the police station being ransacked and burned to the ground. And one of the chief's houses was ransacked and burned to the ground. So it's not an easy situation, and it has made much worse by the fact that the Kanesatake land base has just disappeared to almost nothing over the years. So whatever little is left, people need to figure out a way to turn that into something profitable. So what is the only real competitive advantage that Kanesatake has over other communities? If they open a mechanic garage on the res, it's not going to do better than if one was in Oka. If they open a bakery, it's not necessarily going to do better either. It'll be competitive, but the one real competitive advantage they have is the cops are scared of going there. So criminals come in and they come up with a way to push that reality as far as they can. This started like dispensaries on the res started in 2018 when Clifton Nicholas, who is a journalist, filmmaker, excellent human being, he launched it to help people. That was the idea. It was in a small section of a gas station. He was selling cannabis for medicinal purposes. I think at the time he wouldn't sell it to anyone under 21. It was he wanted it to be something beautiful, and it's been turned into like something grotesque in some of these in some of these places, like the Green Room, like High Times. This is a very long answer, but I kind of want to give you the context of there is this legal / jurisdictional no man's land, and people are taking advantage of it to do bad stuff. It's this exact same thing we saw with illegal dumping. There would be illegal dumping. The locals would go to the Health Canada and say, well, look, I feel like I'm sick because of the illegal dumping. And Health Canada would say, dumping is a Quebec thing, so you should talk to the Environment Ministry. And then they would go to the Environment Ministry, and the Environment Ministry would say, well, you're on Crown land. That's more of an Ottawa problem. Or go to your band council. They'd go to the band council. You know what I mean? Like they would constantly be. So this is a perfect recipe for people having no faith in the institutions and people taking justice into their own hands. And unfortunately, that's what this is, right? It's someone being killed. Oh, maybe that's what our sources are telling us that are very close to the investigation. Someone was killed over essentially a property dispute, right? And it's not the first time it's happened on the res, and it's really scary.
Yeah. And you talked about it a little bit already, but why does this keep happening?
It's weird because this from your own reporting, and Indigenous people are over-policed to the max, right? They are slapped with the most severe punishments for the most minor behavior. If you're caught doing drugs in the city and you're Indigenous, the treatment you'll get from police is much different than if you're white. That's something that's documented in countless reports. We don't even need to mention a specific one. The problem is the flip side of being way over-policed is that when something bad happens to an Indigenous person or to an Indigenous community, there's almost no policing. There's almost no accountability. The people who committed the crime against this community, they get away with it again and again and again because what our system tells us is that Indigenous people matter less. And so that's one of the dynamics at work. And another is just that you have this community where the formative experience was the Oka crisis. Thousands of Canadian soldiers surrounding and besieging the community for an entire summer where everybody inside was convinced, and you talk to people who were there in 90, they'll tell you that we thought we were going to get slaughtered. We thought they were just going to open fire on us and kill all of us. That is an incredibly traumatic experience. And to some degree, the resistance that happened, this is a very long answer, but I think it's important. The resistance that happened in 1990 benefited Indigenous people across North America. It opened people's eyes. It sparked a series of commissions that you could argue, like the Royal Commission into the Condition of Aboriginal Peoples, that led to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, that led to the Commission on Missing and Murdered Women. This all starts in 1990, or at least 1990 is a hugely important part. But inside the community, the horror of being surrounded by the military, of being arrested, of being humiliated by the police, of being beaten, of being, in the case of Wanique Horn-Miller, she was a teenager who was stabbed by a bayonet from one of the soldiers. To experience that violence has to go somewhere. And a lot of it has kind of stayed in the community. And there's a lot of trauma. and it's of course a distrust of all of our institutions, and I think that too plays into why this persists. And if you combine all of these things, and nobody really has, they're living in a situation of like constant managed poverty where you don't have a land base, where it's crown land, you don't own it, you can't go to the bank and ask for a loan against it to start a business. So what do? Then you turn to shit that is like a little bit outside of the law.
Yeah, and when Kanesatake is in the news, a lot of the time it's about crime. We're guilty of this too, right?
Yeah.
But that's not all there is there, right? Like they have a very solid community.
They have a solid everything. I was lucky. I got to grow up 2 towns over in Two Mountains. We played softball with kids from Kanesatake. We went to high school with kids from Kanesatake. They were great. But at the end of the day, they would go back to the res. We would live our lives. There wasn't much other interaction. What I will say about the community is like just this winter, last winter, Dan David, he was a member of the community. He died. Dan David was the first news director at APTN News where you worked. You can't write the history of journalism in Canada without including Dan David. Ellen Gabriel, who was the spokesperson for the Resistance in 1990, she's a best-selling author. She is like an intellectual in Canada who has contributed to resistance movements and our understanding of the issues like missing and murdered women. Like Ellen was pushing that years before there was a commission. Ellen has been on the front lines of so many different struggles, and she's helped so many people outside of her community. And you can't write the history of Canada without talking about 1990. You can't talk about 1990 without talking about Ellen Gabriel. So you have these and these are just 2 examples. There are plenty of young people doing cool and interesting things. There's a lot of interesting art, journalism,
language revitalization.
It's all it's a vibrant community with this one very big problem that you can't divorce from all these other major the land claim that the land that was stolen. It's easy for us to just go there when bad things happen, and we are guilty of that. We need to be going, but right now there are language revitalization programs. There is the community recently bought a farm and expanded its land base. Like they bought it kind of in a neighboring community so that people can learn traditional Mohawk agriculture, so that they can do language programs, back to the land programs. A lot of good and exciting things are happening there, but a lot of it's being drowned out by all this awful shit.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we'll have to do some more stories about some of the good things that are happening in Kanesatake soon.
We absolutely will. One thing that I will mention is that the lacrosse, youth lacrosse has recently come back, and they won the provincial championships last year or 2 years ago, and they have been really competitive. And the great thing about that is that they're taking kids from the res, and there's kids from surrounding communities that had no idea what it's like. And I spoke to parents, and they said, we didn't know, we're learning together, and we're creating a community of understanding and of listening. A lot of things like that are happening, unfortunately, and again, we are guilty of this. We're not putting it out there enough. So, go lacrosse, that's friggin' awesome. There's always great softball teams that come out of there. I get creamed every summer. We happen to have to face the team from the res. We get annihilated, and I'm looking forward to it again this year.
That's great.